I've been asked many times if I can narrate the story of the book which I wrote on a product manager's journey into ESG application development. If I can demonstrate the application as well as I speak on how I developed that product from scratch. So I took time nowadays to really create some kind of structure so that I can walk through and I can talk. So in my first episode, I would like to discuss about the topic thesis from a reporting idea to sustainability operating system. How I achieved that one. So the ESG platform Vasanta is not designed top down. I didn't have that vision of okay, I want a top down approach of this is what I want. This is how I need to restructure it. This is how I need to go deeper into each individual section. It has reason into existence. One architectural decision better. Say, for example, I wanted to have ability to capture the data. Then I wanted to have ability to manage reports, ability to unify the reporting frameworks, ability to collect the data manually, ability to automatically collect the data. Like that, it evolved over a period of time. It was never my thesis that I reasoned it out with the top-down approach. Okay, this is the application. This is what is the structural breakdown of each component as we progress. That was too difficult to envisage. The reason being, there are so many capabilities of ESG, which is not easy to understand, which is not easy to have an end-to-end vision in the beginning itself. So it started with one at a time by a consistent that we need to be consistent of the previous design that could handle it. That's how we begin. So if you look into that from architecturally, it started with ESG is not only reporting. That is the first learning and unlearning what you say we need to have. Then we need to follow a unified framework. Then we need to understand what are the core modules. Then supply chain data means your scope 3 means you are including your supply chain principles into your application. LCA means you are including cross module into R&D and non-SAP non-ERP applications into consideration. Evidence is first, then only you can do the clarity. Then it should be enterprise governance. It cannot be application which is just handling. And finally, the principle which we want to understand. So it started with simple idea that really forced us. The concept is very familiar. That collect ESG data, produce reports, and satisfy the disclosure requirement. That's the that is the main intention before we start with the application. So we thought, okay, we wanted to have an application. Let's have a some kind of assessment of identify all the data which ESG reports is required, identify the data sources, and ability to ingest that information, then create whatever reports they want to produce. That's it, and you satisfy the disclosure requirement is what we initially thought. But every design review, it exposed the same gap. The platform is not designed to handle how enterprises are going to manage sustainability. It is not the data is not available at a one single location so that you go there, you collect everything and you consume it, you report it. That was not the premise. As we dig deeper into each data facet, we uncovered more information. We uncovered and we learned and unlearned many things. So that followed me to come up with 8 reasoning principles, which are by backbone before I could design ESG application. So we started at ESG application data, that is ESG data collection forms, disclosure templates, reason reporting dashboard, simple. I created. I will also try to show you that application. Then we arrived at a unified sustainability strategy and ESG application layer. And finally, I have some benchmarking and parity analysis with leading. ESG application vendors, and we could develop something which is a differentiating, which is ready to pick in the market. So the first and foremost is you need to understand ESG is not only reporting. ESG is more than reporting. That is, we needed to unlearn this point because initially we thought, okay, ESG is multiple frameworks. You collect the data, you report the data, you submit the disclosure. That is what is the ESG all about. But that is not the thing. ESG is not a simple data collection. It is a platform that needs to support with the full life cycle of your sustainability execution before a single number reaches the report. It consists of strategy, goals, data collection, supplier engagement, emission calculations, scope 3 data, auditing, reporting, and even organizational carbon calculation and carbon allocation principles. Everything comes into picture when ESG is tackled. It is not just a report. So we need to move out from dashboard disclosure forms to reports to workflow, data collection, and evidence-based management. That is the first conclusion we could draw. ESG is not only reporting. The second point is a unified sustainability framework is needed. There could be scattered modules which might be used in the application, but we needed to have a single backbone that every module could hang from. That is a framework of how that is connected from strategy to execution you need to understand. For example, your organizational designs strategy, which is a corporate level, how that percolates to operational level of strategy is something you need to be very clear. Your material deployment might be at a group level. How when that percolates to each individual location level, each individual regional level, how that gets integrated into their materiality factors and what attributes they can collect. So that kind of understanding you need to have. You need to have a unified sustainability framework which can go from top level to bottom level in terms of sustainability strategy. You need to have that kind of visibility. That is, every ESG action which you undertake, like setting the net zero or approving a supplier carbon or whatever you take, that needed to be tied back to your strategic ambition and strategic goals of the organization. You cannot just have something set up at the location level, forgetting about the corporate strategy. So, how you tie your corporate strategy to regional or location level management is something which is very important. That is where we have designed platform with strategy and goals, data collection, supplier engagement, emission calculation, so on, which I'll discuss separately. The third point is we wanted to develop scope 3 data, which is very crucial for the application. That brought about the limitation that we are not integrated into supply chain. Once we have the source scope 3 in our consideration, we need to consider supply chain. We need to consider how we manage our suppliers' data, how we understand which supplier to be tackled for our spend or scope 3 data collection, how we go about collecting the data from supplier. Is it a questionnaire? Is it an offline? Is it a spend based? Is it a PCF data collection? Is it an activity based factor? That uncovered so many things which we needed to understand. That is, we needed to have an entire supply chain into consideration. That is where we needed to understand the scope of suppliers, materials, products, spend data, emission factors, activity data, bill of materials. All this comes into picture when we integrated, started understanding scope 3 information. That is where we needed to have the understanding assessment of company ESG data, supplier PCF data, BOM emission factors, spend based fallback. So all these things comes into picture. When that is the crucial point for our unlearning, that we needed to understand that information. The fourth point is LC and PCP required a real calculation and matching layer. That is our life cycle assessment or product carbon footprint calculation. Simple multiplications are not enough. Your life cycle assessment requires you to know the enterprise scale demands like emission factor database. like EcoInvent or those kind of sophisticated database ingestion ability to take this factor into our consideration, and methodology selection, which methodology we wanted to follow for our calculation, uncertainty in quantification. What is the logic we need to follow when we choose an activity, when we have a same material for the activity. So we need to have considered lot many things when LCA and PCM comes into picture. We needed to understand our emission vector libraries, LCA database matches, fuzzy logic, and methodology selection. Everything comes into picture. That is where the calculation layers of emission factor ingestion from EcoInvent, supply PCF, pack-based data collection, manual comes into picture. Then fuzzy matching logic of material M, LCD data set, confidence comes into picture. Then methodology of collectors like emission factor 3.0 or GSC protocol comes into picture. Then if you want to do what if simulation, the, the simulation tools like Monte Carlo simulation, those kind of confidence interval comes into picture. And finally, entire thing, we needed to have a traceability from source to factor. We need to have understanding. So that is another critical factor when we needed to understand LCA data. The other non-negotiable thing when it comes to ESG management is the reporting required. Evidence first, design. So we needed to understand any ESG number that must be explainable. You under CSRD, TCFD, GRI, you can have a factor which you can collect, but before you can submit that factor for your usage, you needed to understand whether you can defend that factor or not. You need to understand. For that one, what is the lineage, how every data point is captured, how is collected based on the timestamp, accurate information, proper audit trail. All this comes into picture. Without that kind of evidences, it was not possible to understand or design an enterprise grade calculations. That is where the evidence chains like raw data sources, data quality checks, calculation methodology, approval workflow, lockout disclosure, all this comes into picture when it comes to the ESG reporting required. Then enterprise readiness requires a governance layer. This is a crucial learning. We cannot design an enterprise grade application without governance in mind. We need to understand who changes, why changes, when changes, whether that is trackable and auditable. It is on that same basis the Vasanta is designed for enterprise deployment. Multiple business units, regulatory jurisdictions, and reporting periods are taken into consideration. We can have tenant isolation, role-based access, approval workflows, audit logs, reporting periods, and change log all comes in picture where the tenants are properly isolated, role-based access are provided, approval workflows are available, data ownership is clear, and configurable matrices so that you can design your configurable one. And one matrices can be consumable by multiple frameworks. Those all things comes into picture so that a proper governance is in place for your ESG requirement. This platform is a tool. It's not a tool. It is an operating system for sustainable execution. It has strategy. It has calculation. It has evidences. It has governance. Everything brings together is your ESG platform, that is Ivasanta. If you look into the core modules, it has a strategy and goals. That is where ESG's complete strategy comes into picture. And then we have something called data collection ability, matrices, emissions, bulk import, and everything comes in picture. Supplier engagement, where you carry out your data collection from your suppliers. Emissions and LCA engine, audits, disclosures, and all that comes in picture. Besides that one, there are many more other applications like your CBAM applications or your UK financial carbon reporting recent law requirement, or digital product passport requirement, or you name it, like carbon allocation within the organization in terms of spend-based carbon allocation for across your organizations too, so that you can have your carbon reduction goals, climate change factor assessment. Those all comes into picture. So to conclude, what I can say is, I did not design this platform. We reasoned out in a way our constraint, one constraint at a time. Every module exists because a simpler design could not handle the reality of enterprise sustainability. With this information, I would like to start my journey of narrating the complete sustainability data platform. Maybe we build together sustainability data platform step by step in each week. This is my first week with introduction. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.